Do you ever log into LinkedIn and scroll through some of the posts and think, what am I doing here? I've been there. And today I want to talk about some of the supposed thought leadership type posts that pop up there and debunk some of the project management stuff that they post and really try and analyze it. So let's get into the first one today. So first I'm going to this one is a little bit shorter. So I'm going to read it. The best dependency map I ever saw was not in a tool. It was a senior program manager who carried the whole web in her head and walked the floor every Friday asking, "What are you waiting on?" Tools scale that instinct, and you should build them, but the instinct comes first. Spend 20 minutes this week drawing your top program dependencies on a single sheet of paper. No software, boxes, and arrows. You'll see at least one line that you have been ignoring. So it sounds, cute on the surface, but let's try and look at this practically. So we have this character that we hear that is this all-knowing, and I'm going to refer to her as Spiderwoman, the dependency mapper. She has an entire dependency map flowchart in her head, and she just walks around the building, and she can just spit out all these different dependency maps like it's nothing. What happens when Spider Woman gets sick or she takes a vacation? What happens when she retires? It's a single point of failure. You only have one person in the entire organization who has an understanding of the dependencies for this particular project or program. That's not a strength at all. The other thing that this brings up for me is, this is like a tribal knowledge situation. So Spider Woman, the dependency mapper, she has all this knowledge in her head. It's not documented anywhere. She can only reproduce it on paper. It's not in any kind of digital form where the rest of the team can see it. So, and she's not sharing it with anyone because it's all in her head. That's an organizational weakness. That's a risk, right? And the risk comes to fruition when she gets sick or when she takes vacation. Um, the other thing is, looking at this practically, right? If I was on when I've worked on projects and programs of any level of complexity, there is no way that I would be able to hand draw a dependency map in 20 minutes. There's just no way. These are the types of diagrams and other assets that I've created in Visio that take me hours and hours to do. Now, again, maybe there are people who are a lot faster, but I I can tell you that 20 minutes for me, even doing it pen and paper, I mean, quite honestly, I don't think I'd be that much faster at it. But I can tell you that the reality is that these are not things that can be done in 20 minutes unless we're talking like super small projects. Sure, can I do a super small project in 20 minutes? Yeah. But a project of any complexity, and this person who posted this was like a PMO expert, so I don't think we're talking about simple projects. I just can't really see the practicality of that. And then the other thing is, it sounds cute, right? It sounds cute that you have this character and she shows up and she can draw everything out. But the reality is that, the practicality of that, as we were just saying, but for a different reason, is really limited. So we have penmanship. How neat is Spider Woman's writing? Can everybody on the team read it? And then can everybody translate her version of it into how they think about it? Right. So what happens if we need revisions? These are the reasons why tools exist, right? They exist because they allow for these things. Can we throw it on a whiteboard and everybody goes up to the whiteboard and erases? Yeah, sure, but that doesn't sound terribly efficient to me. So get it in digital, then we share it with the team. They give their feedback, we edit it, we work on it together, so on and so forth. So for me, this one just really lacks a lot of practicality, and sounds cute in practice, but just not very practical for me. All right, let's get into the second one. So the second one is a little bit longer. The company's governance model required a formal steering committee sign off at each of the five sequential phase gates, spaced roughly 6 weeks apart. My delivery team wanted to work in 2 week sprints, which meant each phase gate would land after exactly 3 sprint cycles. Neither side was going to change overnight, and pretending otherwise would have gotten the project killed by whichever side felt ignored. Instead of picking one model, I ran both, translated into each other. The team worked in 2-week sprints internally, sprint planning, daily stand-ups, sprint reviews, the full rhythm 3 times per phase gate. But I mapped the output of each set of the 3 sprints back to the specific deliverable the steering committee expected at that gate. And I reported progress to leadership using their language. Percentage complete against the current phase, not velocity or story points. Terms that would have meant nothing to a committee used to Gantt charts. Translation work was mine to do, not the team's and not the committee's. Every 2 weeks internally, the team saw working software and adjusted based on feedback. Every 6 weeks externally, after 3 of those sprints had accumulated, the steering committee saw phase gate deliverable that looked exactly like what they'd approved in every other project they'd governed. Neither audience changed how they work. I just stopped assuming one framework had to replace the other and used the sprint cadence as the internal engine that fed the external gate on schedule. I'm going to cut it there. There was a little bit more about how this was successful and the VP couldn't believe it and so on and so forth. But let's get into the actual reality of this one. So, for me, the first thing that jumped out, in this kind of one I'll refer to as like a translation miracle is that for me, the real accomplishment would have been to get the organization aligned with the sprint structure. It sounds like some pretty much Scrum, to get the organization aligned with Scrum, to kind of, say, well, I'm translating it and we really are, neither group is going to agree to the other's approach. That doesn't sound productive to me. It doesn't sound like an accomplishment. It sounds like we didn't want to stand up for the team and try to find a way where everybody could work together. So we just kind of, tried to shoehorn some things together. So to me, there's really not a lot of positive in that. It feels like a missed opportunity to me. The other thing is, we talked, here we talked about the translation and this PM is saying, oh, I did all this translation. And, for me, translating at any level in project management is a daily activity. It's not an act of feeding the entire organization with 5 loaves and 2 fish, right? It's something that we do every day. So when I'm talking to senior leadership and I'm talking to engineers, those are different levels of translation. The senior leader doesn't want to know and doesn't care about why this UI element is blue instead of green. They don't care about any of that usually. And then if I'm talking to the client, they don't want to hear about, okay, well, we're having this issue on AWS with our EC2 instance. They don't care. So, you're always translating, you're always saying, hey, we're working through some challenges with our architecture. We should have it resolved tomorrow. That's all they need. So that level of translation is something that we're always doing. It's not something where we're reinventing the wheel to translate. We're always translating context. So translating Scrum into hybrid or waterfall, however you want to look at this. I think this PM said it was hybrid. To me, it feels a little bit more waterfall style to what the steering committee was doing. But there's nothing really extraordinary about that. It's just a matter of, hey, we're always having to translate. It's like when we're doing, a lot of us who do agile, we get asked by leadership to create a Gantt chart. Well, yeah, that's just translating. We're just translating what we're going to be doing and how it's going to look to a way that management can understand. But at the team level, they don't care. It doesn't matter. So it's all translation. The team isn't going to really be moved that much by seeing a Gantt chart with all the high level features and epics on it. They want to know, hey, what do I need to do? And so that's the translation. The other thing, and the last point here is really, what this PM did was took a milestone and broke it into sprints and, set off the team to work on sprints. That's normal, right? That's what we do. That's the whole concept of any of these agile frameworks is, we're taking the work, we're breaking it into smaller pieces, and we're delivering software in more regular intervals so that we can adapt. So we're making less mistakes, so we ensure the client's happy, and so on and so forth. So for me, it sounds good, right? It sounds, the way this was phrased, it all sounds great in concept, but there's a lot of things here that just are a little bit fluffy for me. And really the concept of this translation miracle is just kind of feels feels like a little bit of a fallacy, to be honest. It's an everyday part of the job. All right, let's get into the next one here. Right. Nobody talks about what to do when the project was built for an organization that no longer exists in quite the same form. Organizations change constantly, priorities shift, leadership changes, market conditions evolve. The strategic context that made a project essential in Q1 may look materially different by Q3. And the project plan, if it has not been revisited, is still being executed against assumptions that are no longer fully valid. This is one of the most uncomfortable conversations in program management. Because the project has been scoped, resourced, and committed to, people's roadmaps and careers are attached to it. The organization has publicly declared that this work matters. And yet something has changed, and the PM who sees it clearly has a decision to make about when and how to name it. The PM who waits, who keeps delivering against the old context, hoping the organization will notice the drift on its own, is almost always the one managing the most expensive version of the problem. Because the longer a misaligned project runs, the more entrenched the investment becomes and the harder the conversation gets. The PM who names it early, who brings the evidence of the drift to the right stakeholders with clear options analysis rather than a conclusion, is the one who gets to shape what happens next rather than manage the fallout of what happens without them. The project that no longer fits the organization is not a failure, it's information. The question is what you do with it. So, again, it's very interesting. I think a lot of these takes are just really interesting. So let's kind of work through it. So the first thing that jumps out for me is, this person is framing these organizational changes as the project manager's responsibility. The reality is that when you have organizational changes, whether that's leadership, culture, priority, whatever that is, that's the responsibility of whatever governance function you have in your organization. So, it sounds like we're talking about a fairly large organization for some of these cases. And, whether that's a PMO, whether that's a steering committee, whatever that looks like, that's their responsibility. It's up to them to make sure that whatever projects that we have in our pipeline, that they have been validated against any organizational changes, any priority changes, any business case changes. That's their responsibility. And yes, once it goes to PM, yeah, they of course are going to look at it in like the initiation phase, but that's the problem here. So when it's sitting in that queue, there needs to be a regular process by, again, the PMO or the steering committee to look at all the projects in the queue, whatever that is, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever it is, and make sure that they are still valid business problems that we're solving with these projects. That's their job. It's not the job of a PM to be the governance body of the organization. So now the part that kind of does fall in the PM, like I was alluding to, is once you get into initiation, you're obviously validating, right? So we've all seen, like in the PMBOK, you do your charter, you validate that business case, you validate the market conditions, and you make sure the project still makes sense. Now, again, in this example, right, where we have a larger organization, it shouldn't be up to the PM to do that based on a CEO change, right? They shouldn't be the one to say, oh, well, our CEO just changed, so should we be doing this project? That falls way above them. So, the next thing that we heard about in this was, that the PM being put in a position to deliver against old context, and how that would be, how they, the ones that adapt are the most successful. The reality is that the PM should never be put in that position to deliver against old context. And if they actually are, then there's a massive organizational leadership failure that happens. There's no way that we can blame the PM, or say, in this case, or say that this is a hero PM because they recognized that the organization was completely off the rails because they changed leadership. I mean, again, if they do that, sure, but that's not the reality. That's not how it works, and that's not how it should work. And really, most PMs, they in organizations like this where it's large, they're not getting that lower level. They're not getting those details where they would know all the internal discussions that are happening, right? They're getting, okay, is this project is still a go? This project is still a priority. That's pretty much it, right? From the PMOs that I've worked in, I mean, that's pretty much what we get. So again, I just can't get on board with that one. And then the last thing that I really struggled with in this post was, the portfolio drift is how the PM needs to flag portfolio drift. Well, I don't know a lot of PMs, and there are some, right, but only in title, where they're really a PM and they're managing a portfolio of projects. That can happen. But they're not responsible for portfolio drift. That's the portfolio manager. That's the PMO. That's the steering committee. It's the same concept that we hear over and over in this post is, well, the PM is the one who should be saving the day when the organization starts to show, some changes or show some cracks. No, absolutely not. There's no way that a PM is going to have enough knowledge to be able to do this. They don't know the inner workings of the organization. They're not looped in on that. So it's just not really a truly practical premise for me. All right, so get into our last case of the day here. Right, a PM I mentor started using AI to write her PRDs. PRDs are product requirements documents. What used to take days now takes an hour. But she isn't getting home any earlier. She's spending those saved hours comparing the build against the doc, fixing gaps, and rewriting requirements. I ran this past a mentor of mine who has strong opinions on this stuff. He said, she's still measuring whether the product matches the PRD. That's output thinking. The real question is whether anyone needed the thing in the first place. He's right, building is cheap now, but that means the danger isn't wasted documentation, it's wasted code. You can prototype in an afternoon, but if you haven't validated the problem, you've just built a very fast answer to a question nobody asked. So here's what we're trying to practice instead. Stop treating faster PRD generation as progress. It isn't. It's automating the wrong step. Go find the problem first. Talk to a user. Look at the data. Understand the pain. Then build a rough version, a quick prototype, a vibe-coded experiment, just to see, not to launch, just to learn. Reality is a better editor than imagination. Build first, learn what's actually true, then write down only what held up. So, this one is interesting. I guess, somewhat because of AI, and I think it's something that people on LinkedIn love to talk about is AI. But it kind of leaned into. We really started off in this post hearing about this PM using AI for requirements, but then we kind of flipped it to validating the problem. And I think for me, this post is a little bit confusing because it feels like we start off with the fact that we wanted to make this point, right? And so it sounds like this PM wanted to make the point that validating the problem is important. But the example that we gave of somebody using AI requirements, to me, that doesn't have much relevance to it. So it just was a little bit disjointed. But let's try and break it down. So for me, validating the problem is a legitimate thing, right? And ideally, that's done before the project starts, right? It is, we don't have things, and we kind of talked about this earlier. We don't have projects on the docket where we haven't validated the problem that the business is having and what it's going to solve for them. So that's something really that should be done before a project starts. It should be done as part of the intake process and the project request process. The other thing is then we going back to the requirements is, AI generated requirements aren't a panacea, right? They still need to be validated. And that validation needs to happen when they're written and as development happens. And what we heard about here was the reason for me that the PM was spending more time on, or the same amount of time, even though they used AI to generate the requirements in a fraction it would have taken, is because they didn't validate them and they didn't study them up front. So the validation during development took longer because all they did was a copy and paste up front. So if you're not that familiar with the requirements and the work starts coming in, then you're going to have to go back and refamiliarize yourself with the requirements. And that's that's where we're saying is that this is not, these AI requirements aren't a panacea, right? And when you write, take the time and you write the requirements yourself, you know them inside out, right? And for me, that's a really valuable thing, because you have to sit there and you have to think through every single edge case that might happen. Whereas with AI, you don't know whether they are, whether it's something where every edge case has been considered. It's only based on what you've provided to them. So we're saying that, oh, we have to validate the problem and all these things, and that's all fine and well. But what you put into these tools is what you get out. So you have to, yes, you have to have a validated problem, but you also have to have a structure of some requirements to provide to them on the project. If you go and you say, hey, I want to redesign our homepage and I want to make it look like Walmart's homepage, well, you're going to get a pretty generic output, and it's not going to consider any edge cases. It's not going to be framed to your business. So it's the same kind of approach. You have to take the same approach to throwing this stuff into AI as you would if you were doing it, if you were presenting it to or handing the task off to someone else on your team, right? And I think that's what's getting missed. And so for me in this case, it's not using AI isn't an excuse to skip knowing the requirements inside and out. And I realize this may not apply to everyone. There's some PMs that don't really touch requirements. It's business analyst function, or that's a product function. And that's fine. But for some of us like myself who have been in this situation before, for me, it's been extremely valuable to write them myself. Um, Again, it doesn't mean there aren't efficiencies that can be achieved, but I personally wouldn't in a million years do what happened here, which is, oh, I got them from, Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude, and I just threw them over the fence, and now I have to go back and validate them. That doesn't make sense to me, right? So, all right, so let's kind of recap what where we are today. So, I think a lot of this stuff, it sounds great on the surface. When you read these, I guess they're referred to as like thought leadership posts, apparently. It sounds great, right? It in as a premise, it sounds okay. This person sounds really smart, and it sounds like they're pretty knowledgeable. But when you start drilling down into what's actually said, and you think about, well, can I apply this to my project? Does this make sense to me? That's where the cracks start to come into the foundation. And I think the problem is that there are situations that obviously fit, right, what is being described. There are some. But I think what we're doing is we're taking like five sizes of shoes and trying to fit them all in a size 10 box. And and that's, I think, the problem is people want to come out and they want to make posts that sound great and that get people to click the thumbs up button and get engagement and get people looking at their profile and potentially interested in them as a candidate for a job or a consulting engagement. But the reality is that it's not really practical, right? And so we're just trying to throw a one size fits all, and real project management is not one size fits all. Every single project is different. And it very, very rarely does it fit these narratives. We just looked at four of them. I mean, I can't think of many projects that fit those narratives that I've worked on in 16 years of doing this. The last point is pragmatic project management, real actual project management that exists outside of these grandiose posts, serves the team first, and it can't be explained broad strokes in a single thought leadership post. I wouldn't be able to make a post to explain, how every single project should be run. Sure, there are some general concepts, but to say things like, oh, well, everybody needs to use AI, or, AI didn't save time, and all these things, that would be impossible for me to do. Okay. Because again, my approach is based on what's practical and what benefits the team. And I continue to believe that's the only way to go. I hope you enjoyed. I thank you for watching and listening. If you have feedback, you can always send it to pmor@illyriansolutions.com. I know that's a long one, so the link is in the description. Thank you again. Have a great day.